plastic. Here in Norway, graves are protected by law for 20 years. 20 years. But after that, the spot can be reused. Usually, a grave is fine to reopen after 20 years. The body is supposed to be decomposed and pretty much gone. Now back to plastic. Between the 50s and 80s, it was common here to be buried in plastic to minimize smell and leakage. I'm sure they thought it was a good idea back then, but once we started reusing graves in Norway, we realized it is a curse. A lot of the bodies are wrapped in plastic, and I've myself been part of what was supposed to be a burial at a reused site. The body was about 50 or 60 years old and should be basically gone, but nope. The plastic wrap it was covered by kept the body from decomposing, and it's basically just been marinating in its own juices for 50 to 60 years. The smell was awful. The sight was even worse. I'm sure this is not the kind of story you wanted, but it's honestly the most horrifying and bizarre thing I've ever been a part of. This story just reaffirmed that I am going to be cremated when I die as an old lady like Rose from Titanic. The next story says, not really a cemetery experience, but it was still pretty freaky. My grandparents live out in the middle of nowhere, pretty much, and it's surrounded by woods. On their property, there was a whole family that owned my grandparents' property before them. From what I was told, they were killed or something like that. A few years ago, when I was living with them, a relative that was related to the dead family came up to the property and wanted to remove the bodies from the yard. My grandpa was extremely happy about it because he wanted to expand the house, but couldn't because he didn't want to mess with the graves. So they got together and I stood nearby watching them dig up 4 caskets. There were 3 adult-sized caskets and 1 child-sized casket, and they all looked really, really old. One of the bigger caskets had holes and cracks all over it. That was the one that my grandpa and the other relative was carrying when the body fell out. Oh my god, out of the bottom of the casket. The body was pretty much bones, but it still had old muscle and tissue on it. I remember feeling sick to my stomach as we watched them uncomfortably put the body back in the casket upside down. What? Somebody asked them what did they do with the bodies. Bodies. My grandpa and the relative of the dead family put them in the back of the guy's truck, drove them up to Kansas because that's where the rest of the family is buried. We thought it was weird, but we weren't going to ask any questions. The next story says, former funeral director here. My partner and I had just gotten back to the funeral home from a call for a 31-year-old woman who had died of cancer. As we were moving her body from the cot to the embalming table, we heard an audible click, and the radio across the room turned on full volume of static. It's one of those old radios you turn the volume dial on until it clicks. We both looked at each other. He was an extremely religious man, and this event visibly shook him, and he left not long after. I shut the radio off, as I typically used my phone to listen to music while embalming. When I had finished the procedure and was attempting to move her from the embalming table to the dressing table, I heard the click from that old radio, and it turned on full volume yet again. At that point, I was fairly freaked out and made my exit. My partner and I never spoke about it again, and nothing like that has ever occurred to my knowledge before or after. The next person says, I used to do some odd jobs at the 12th century graveyard in my hometown. 12th century as in the church and its surrounding graveyards have been in continuous use for at least that long. When you keep burying bodies in the same small patch of ground for that many centuries, eventually the soil has been footprints rather than crushed seashells. Not really scary or unexpected, but a bit eerie until you get used to it. You learn to treat anything recognizable as human remains with respect, and just tuck it away out of sight under a plant, or what else you were putting there. The next one says, my dad purchased a cemetery when I was in middle school, and I worked for him through high school graduation. I did yard work, mowing, weed eating, flower beds, etc. Aside from the occasional shadows seen out of the corner of my eye, seeing people who turned out not to be there, and hearing strange sounds, the cemetery was actually quite a peaceful place. But the strangest thing is when you have a burial in the crypts. Basically, you dig down about 5 or 4 feet to expose giant cement doors. You put the cement doors off and drop it down into your little room. These rooms can fit 2 coffins or years and years and years and years of worth, of cremated remains. So back in the 50s and 60s, families would buy one crypt, and the entire fam would be cremated and put in it. Some just put the cremated remains in it and close her up, but others light candles and leave flowers and souvenirs and pictures and shit. It's fucking creepy opening up one of those bad boys after 50 years and finding melted candles and old pictures of people inside. Plus, when you hop down in there, you have a weird realization that you're on the same level and completely surrounded by bodies. The next person says, lots of strange people visiting. I worked at the cemetery Jimi Hendrix is buried at, so lots of weed and people hanging around. We found a dead, homeless man behind the mausoleum. Smelled him first. One time, getting ready to bury a person, we dug a grave. It was in a section of the graveyard that had very old burials, 100+ years, so wooden caskets. My foreman at the time was squaring off the hole with a shovel, and then he saw a skull looking right at him. He looked quickly and quietly and pushed it further into the dirt and told us not to say anything. If the office people had found out, it would have been a whole thing. Digging it up, trying to figure out who it was, etc. Never saw a ghost, but some of the old-timers say they did. Not sure if I believe them. The next says, I worked for a county cemetery department years ago. We would all go to the cemeteries in the county and mow and just do basic upkeep. Occasionally people, mainly farmers, would stumble upon some headstones in a field or stand of trees, and we would come out and prod the ground with dowel rods to find more headstones and re-establish the cemetery. Soon after I started working there, we got a tip about some headstones a farmer found while clearing out a path through the trees for easier access to his field. It turned out to be the oldest cemetery in the county, dating back to the 1700s. After investigating some of the names on the headstones, it got creepy. The story is that before the cemetery was there, a schoolhouse stood there. The teachers were a husband and a wife. It's not clear exactly on what happened, but the students and the husband and the wife all died in the schoolhouse. The information we found kind of made it sound like an illness of some kind, and they were all quarantined in the school until they all died. After that, the school was demolished, and the students and the husband and the wife were all buried right where the school stood. So yeah, I'm sure it's haunted. The next story says, I used to mow the lawn at a cemetery as part of my summer job. I always volunteered because it was the only place I could work with my shirt off and try to fight my farmer's tan. Anyway, the only creepy thing is that coffins must break and fill with dirt over time, because once in a while you'll be walking and sink up to your knee in a small sinkhole on top of a grave. No thank you. Didn't really bother reception/office management. The cemetery was closed from Friday afternoon through Saturday evening for Sabbath. We sometimes stayed a bit later in the office on Friday afternoons to get bills out or checks processed. We heard a loud commotion by the cemetery entrance, which was locked, and only staff could get in and out. The office manager went to see what was going on and made me come with her. We went down to the gate to find an older woman, probably around 70, dressed to the nines, begging us to let her in. She kept saying she needed to get back there. This was in the suburbs of New Jersey, so you needed a car to get around, but we didn't see a car or anything. She was just there in this beautiful dress. We couldn't open the gate without the cemetery manager, so we went to go get him. We brought him back to the gate and no one was there. We looked at the video footage in the entrance and you could see us, the office manager and me, talking, but there was no one on the other side of the gate. The cemetery manager thought we were trying to trick him. I swear to this day we saw a woman in a fancy dress outside that gate. There were multiple cameras and not a single one picked up anyone on the other side of the gate. You could see the whole gate, and all you could see was us. I don't know if it was a ghost or what. Yes, bitch, it was a ghost. The office manager and I decided not to tell anyone else, but we would mention it to each other every once in a while. Definitely a ghost. Don't even question it. I hope she found her way back. The next story says, I dug graves for 6 months. One afternoon we had to hand dig a hole in the older cemetery because we couldn't run any heavy equipment over any of the older plots. It was super tough and took us a lot longer than usual. When we were finally close to being done, it was dark and hard to see. I remember my shovel hitting a brick of the neighboring plot before cement caskets and it coming loose. I swear to God I saw something move inside the small hole and practically jumped out of the grave. I got back in to finish the job, but was definitely spooked. Somebody commented and said this reminds me of a short story I had read. Coffins used to be built with holes in them, attached to 6 feet of copper tubing and a bell. The tubing would allow air for the victims buried underneath, who were mistakenly thought to be dead. Harold, the Oakdale gravedigger, upon hearing a bell, went to go see if it was children pretending to be spirits. Sometimes it was also the wind. This time it wasn't either. A voice from below begged, pleaded to be unburied. You Sarah O'Bannon? Yes, the voice assured. You were born September 17th, 1827. Yes, the gravestone here says you died on February 19th. No, I'm alive. It was a mistake. Dig me up, set me free. Sorry about this, ma'am, Harold said, stepping on the bell to silence it and plugging the tube with the dirt. But this is August. Whatever you is down there, you ain't alive no more. And you ain't coming up. The next story says, it's not quite the same, but I had an uncle who tried working, as in selling and doing drugs, at the graveyard between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. He only lasted a few nights in that area and then never went back. What was it in that scared him so badly? He felt his soul rattle in his bones as his blood froze cold. Prairie dogs. Bucking prairie dogs. What's so frightening about simple ground squirrels, you might ask? Those cute little fuzzballs that scavenge whatever they can. Well, apparently they like to randomly come out of their holes in the middle of the night and scream. Creepy, but that doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, now imagine being surrounded by dozens of little rodents you can't see in the pitch black of the night, surrounded by dead, tweaked out of your mind, paranoid as hell, and then suddenly hearing hellish, blood-curdling screaming around you. comment